Hello everyone, and thank you so much for turning out. It's indeed a really exciting moment for me, for us, everybody involved in the team. This has been it's taken us 2 years in the making, but it's been an incredible 2 years, and this is one of the first small steps that we're taking to create research from the ground, from the region, and it's a matter of great pride for all of us that all the papers are by researchers from the region, and that's something that we need to do because we need to be able to tell our stories ourselves. I'm not saying other people shouldn't, but we also need to build our own capacity, and this is one of the first steps. And I was, just reading the chapters and editing the papers, it gave me so much hope. It was like, oh my God, this is really cool. All is not lost, right? And I can I was like, oh my God, this is really exciting for us. And so before I begin, I also want to thank Raman because without his support and his vision, this would not have been possible, because I don't know which publisher would just take this kind of risk, because we don't know if we'll even sell the copies, but I hope we do. And once again, thank you very much for being here. And it's very interesting for me because for the first time I'm going to be on the other side asking questions, right? And today we have on the panel two of the contributing authors and my co-editor. And this is a very a intimate crowd, so it's going to be quite an informal session. So what we want to do is we just want to have a brief chat, and then we'll open it up to the audience towards the end. So if you have any burning questions, please ask questions also. So I'm just going to open up the floor and just get the authors to just briefly introduce themselves.
Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Yojak Tamang. I'm from Kalimpong, and so I finished my masters in 2019 from Presidency University. And after that, I've been trying to get into any institution for research and all. So my contribution was for this book was on seasonal migrant laborers. It is on these potters in Darjeeling Hills who kind of contribute to the economy through their labor. So this chapter talks about their engagement into the kind of the economy that we have in, because Darjeeling being a kind of a touristic kind of a hotspot. So what are the challenges and the vulnerabilities that these seasonal human laborers face? So it is only in Darjeeling that we kind of see human potters, while it is absent here. I hardly see any kind of human potters in Kalimpong and other areas. But we do see human laborers in construction sites and all. So I found this research very interesting because the seasonal human laborers who come all the way from far distant remote villages of Nepal. So their crossing political boundaries itself makes them very vulnerable. So they are excluded from social, political, kind of economically they are all excluded. My chapter is related to that.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nirvan. I'm Nirvan Pradhan. I'm a PhD candidate in Center for Political Studies in JNU. My dissertation is broadly looking at how so those spaces of labor that I would call in Darjeeling are shrinking. There are no employment. The Gorkhaland movement has failed. How do people then make sense of their lives, right? And what I'm trying to argue is that those spaces of labor from Darjeeling have shifted to abroad, right? So there's a lot of migration towards the Middle East, towards Southeast Asian countries. But as people migrate, what are the experiences, but also the costs of migration that happens on their lives, that happens on their families, that happens on their bodies? So that's basically what I've been working on.
Hi everyone, I am Ktien. I am currently teaching linguistics at Tetso College, Nagaland. I used to live here in Gangtok for 5 years. I was working in Sikkim University in the Center for Endangered Languages. So that way I got very much into cultures and communities and their ground level, life and realities, and that's I think that's how I come into this. Plus also my engagement with the queer community here, and so all of that together informs my understanding of how life here is, and so that's about me. I would actually like to ask Nirvan something. Your work is basically on migration and stuff, and yet the chapter you contributed was on a totally different line.
Yeah.
I would like to know what motivated this. How did you come into this kind of research?
Yeah, so for people who've not read the book or the chapter that I've been working on, my chapter is titled Inaru Jaste, Gender Non-Performativity in Anglo-Indian Schools, and what the chapter attempts to do is, because the Anglo-Indian schools in Darjeeling are set up in the colonial era, and they have a lot of Christian mores of, the foundation principles being very Christian. A lot of children who do not perform their gender, right? So they do not perform the gender correctly. Their experiences in those schools, right, where they are bullied, where they are harassed, where there's a lot of disciplining that takes place. My chapter explores that aspect of their lives. And when you asked me, like, why would I want to work, is because I've studied in Anglo-Indian schools myself, and also I think it's something that I think when I was working ethnographically and interviewing people for this chapter, I think a transgender person told me that I don't think anybody was interested in our stories until you came and interviewed me, so I think it's time for us to even tell those stories which are just invisibilized in the everyday discourse and just neglected. So that's the motivation.
Thank you. And just wanted to extend the same question to Yojak, because you also work on a completely different thing. And I was also interested because you went out and did completely new field work for this thing, right? So again, what was your motivation? Why were you interested in this topic?
So basically, what you see is since our political history is kind of related to kind of migration, not saying that people who were living here in the Eastern Himalayas and people who were crossing boundaries, the political boundaries are newly set up, but still, with coming of the colonizers, what we see is with them they brought in a lot of kind of laborers too. But right now, even the labor, what they have brought in, as the continuation of labor mobility is still there. But there is a difference now. Earlier, during the colonial times, the labor movement mobility was there, but it was for a kind of settlement type. But now what we see is it is seasonal in nature. People come, it's kind of circulatory. So that continuity of labor itself kind of it was very interesting for me, because that was the kind of the daily kind of everyday life that we see these people, and also our history is also somewhere entangled with it. So that was a motivation behind it. And because everything from everywhere, from small goods to everything that we have in our table, it would not be possible without the labor of these kind of seasonal migrant laborers. So they play a very vital role in the economy itself, but also we just normalize those kind of things, but we don't see them as we don't give them what we need, I guess.
Because your chapter talks about women laborers, right? And I was just wondering, because we don't see a lot of that in Gangtok, but we see a lot in Darjeeling. I'm not sure about Kalimpong. Could you just hazard a guess as to why that is? You don't have to have an answer as to why we don't have that here in Gangtok.
So even I'm very curious about it. Even I don't have an answer to it. But maybe, I don't know, maybe because of the Darjeeling is a kind of a plantation economy, and if you see that the history of labor movement itself had the women coming in because of that gender aspect. We can see that women were required in the tea plantations, right? But whereas in Kalimpong it's absent, and maybe that's one of the reasons. Because even in Kalimpong we see like potters like all male dominated. And when I ask, do we see any women laborers? There are few, but not as much as in kind of Darjeeling. Maybe I think they are the kind of more surplus labor that we see.
And hence doubly marginalized as you're talking about. Just a quick question to my co-editor about your motivation to do this, which is, can be quite obvious, but if you could just tell us why.
First and foremost, I think it's because I'm queer myself and I'm venturing into a field, an area of linguistics called queer linguistics, which is just starting off. There's hardly any work in India. So my research area itself, I found that it was moving to that side. And therefore, a work like this was an amazing thing to contribute to. And then also, we did discuss about how work from this area on these kind of topics are very less. But it's not just this area. For instance, like, how do I put this? The kind of, so something like Nirvan's chapter, it's on gender non-conforming identities. This kind of thing is not spoken about in the mainstream anywhere. It's very less. So that way, I mean, I was really, really happy to be part of this whole venture.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, just to continue, because you are doing this from an academic, because we are doing different things, and this whole collection is bringing different issues under one roof, which is amazing in its own way. But because you're working in this, I mean, what kind of gap you think this work is filling? Because by the sounds of it, it sounds important, but of course I'm biased, right? But what do you think, is the contribution? What can this thing contribute to the ongoing discussions?
First and foremost, I think work from India in this, in queer studies or in gender studies, queer studies mainly, is very less. We all talk about theories and authors from Western, and we use those perspectives to look at the situation in India, and that doesn't really work because situations are different, our realities are different. So we need people from here who see reality as it is, as it happens here, to talk about it. That's the first and foremost thing. Secondly, again, when we started off, we thought, okay, what do people understand by gender identity or even sexualities? We had very few categories to go by, right? And I, for one, I didn't expect to find so many identities addressed. I mean, it's not just gender, but also the interaction of gender and sexuality with the other identities, even the migrant labor or ethnicities or nationality even. I didn't expect nationality to come up at all. So all of these different kinds of things, we would have thought, okay, some femininity, some masculinity, some Nepali identity, yeah. But then the kind of interactions, the intersections we got, that I think that is a major gap that we are filling.
Thank you. Everybody buy this book. Right? And just like now to talk to our our contributors, and they've contributed really amazing chapters. And of course, I can't pick which one's my favorite because that would be but yeah, just wanted to talk to you guys about writing these, because these are, we were doing this in the middle of COVID and things. And so what were the challenges that you guys faced? Because I know that both of you went out and did interviews and things like that. So what were the challenges? And also in terms of access, right? Not just access to people, but also access to knowledge, information, journals. What are the challenges that you guys faced? Maybe Nirvan, you want to go first?
Yeah, so the Call for Papers came out in 2020 when the pandemic was happening, right? And when I went to Darjeeling for fieldwork, I got COVID. And first I was like, I could not taste the salt in the dal, and I was thinking, maybe auntie le kamti haldi wala, but No, it was COVID, right? So I think that was one challenge that I faced, was how fieldwork also involves a lot of the able body is also affected by going to the field. But I think like, of course, the method that I've employed is ethnographic, and I talk to people. I did a lot of digital interviews because of the pandemic constraints. But I think one thing that I felt when I was writing this chapter is also, like, as ethnographers, we can also be very exploitative. Like, we dig out information from people, but in what way? That's for me. I don't know about other scholars, okay? But like, when we are entrusted with other people's stories, we have a responsibility to tell that story. I think I like what Anna Singh says. No, she says the purpose of anthropology is to tell dark stories beautifully. So these stories are dark, but also as our responsibility is to tell these stories beautifully. But coming back to the point that I'm trying to make is that we have to therefore also give back to the community. It cannot just be take from them, right? Extractive knowledge, especially ethnography. So I think that's another thing that I've been thinking about, and I think especially while writing this chapter, that has really stayed with me about giving back to the community from which we take so much of our knowledge from.
I think it was like the literature is very scant, first of all, and in the field it felt like we had to take precautions, but when I went to the field it was kind of normal for them. I'm not saying the COVID was not there, but they had to do their work. So irrespective of COVID being there or not, so they had to go to their for work, and it was kind of normal for them. So, but the point is, like, even if someone would get sick, those kind of facilities that the citizens would get access to, they would not. Then the other thing was, during this pandemic, these seasonal migrant laborers would not get access to rations, which the other laborers would get because they had their Aadhaar card and everything. So during this kind of period, it was difficult, but it was more difficult for them.
I was just thinking, this is like younger generation of researchers, right? And emerging researchers. And the whole point of this exercise is to create a platform for emerging researchers. What kind of space do you think this is filling? Because I'm just picking up from what Nirvan said about our responsibility to respondents and things like that. But do you think through this work we are also trying to fill in like a larger responsibility towards, I don't know, our communities or whatever? So what is the space that we're filling, you guys think? Or maybe we're not. Maybe this is just fun.
The literature is very scant. So during my master's degree, if I was working on Gorkhaland movement, so I wouldn't get any literature on it. So the literature that I used to find was this some authors or scholars who have worked on it, and those are the set of literature that I would get access to. And some other literature was inaccessible, and it was very expensive. And that's that. And the kind of research work that we would come up with was kind of the same old one, because we don't have new literatures, right? And right now, even the difficulties that I think I face is people in the kind of mainstream academia is not that much interested in our research work. So if I come up with seasonal migrant laborers who cross political boundaries of India and Nepal, so I go with this, and it's kind of a thing that happens because for capital you need labor, and that's there. But so this kind of research is even not entertained because it's very alien and distant to them. What we see every day is that's, so they don't kind of, I feel it's not that much entertained. Had it there been more of it, then we would get more, kind of produce more literature, and even the voices from the margins would come up. That's what I feel. And getting to publish this and getting to know about what's going on, that would also help us in reproducing individuals.
Yeah, so I want to share a story about when I went with my research proposal to my center, and I entered the cabin, and there was this professors in Delhi, in JNU, looking very officious and drinking tea. And I said, I want to work in my region. And they said, one of the professors said, I won't name them, they said, do you want to work in your own region? No paternalism, okay? And the other professor was laughing and he was saying, oh, it'd be so fun to do fieldwork in Darjeeling, right? See, the problem with institutions like central universities is they look at us like, we're not important for them, right? Like, Easterners, like, who gives a shit, right? Sorry. But the thing is, like we have to, therefore, in our own, so like something like this, right? Something like what Mona has done, right? Is like right? Something like this is actually a contribution, because unless we put ourselves out there, none of the people in Delhi or those important universities are ever going to give us that space to tell our stories. So I think it's very important for us. So we need, for younger scholars, right? For not just for people like me, but for people who are now coming up, we would need publishers, but we would also need people in universities, in central universities like DU and JNU, who would support scholars from the region, right? Because if you go with the topic, right, like you were also saying, like if you go with this topic, they will say these topics have no purchase, right? So I think it's very important for us to therefore of course, one is to infiltrate those universities, is to build spaces, right? And unless we do that, unless we have university presses, unless we have people in even like bookstores and in universities as teachers, I don't think we will ever get that space to tell our own stories. I think that's very important.
Yojak, only yesterday I came to know that you're a photographer. So I was struck by the way in your chapter, the way you described the scene that you see in Darjeeling about the migrant women porters, and how it's in drastic contrast with the people who work in the office and they talk about them, things like that. Does your photography interest has it contributed in any way to this kind of ethnographic interest as well?
I think we live in a kind of a digital space, right? So pictures images are the kind of a like fast communicating kind of a thing. So I do take pictures of them, but I try to portray them not in a manner like in a derogatory sense, but kind of try to show what's there. I mean, so all my Instagram I have feeds has been of these seasonal migrant laborers, if not women. So yeah, so that's a kind of a way to communicate with the society that even they are there. So I try to, through my photographs, kind of communicate that these are the people who are kind of reproducing the society, and if their labor was not there, then the society to be reproduced itself would be like kind of very difficult.
I just had a specific question for Nirvan, and I completely agree with what you were saying, and I suppose that's also been the motivation for all of us here. To do what we're doing. We're doing it in our individual capacities, but it's amazing to be able to bring a whole lot of people, and also like to everyone here, like who's come to support us, right? So that's really great. But I wanted to ask you something about regarding your chapter, because you talk of how there's an institutionalization of bullying for non-gender conforming behavior, right? And I just wanted to know, because you were talking to all these people, where is it at exactly? Is it getting worse for gender non-conforming students, or is it getting better because there's more exposure to media and technology, or is there a generation gap that young people are more understanding of these things, and the older people who are in positions of power are very rigid about it still?
Yes. So I think my chapter is different from other chapters in that it's talking about children and their formative experiences in school, right? And this is not a biased opinion, but it's from the interviews that I've collected. I would say the children are very vicious in these schools, and you're going to be bullied a lot if you don't perform your gender, right? Not just from your co-peers, but also from the teachers and the administration, right? So therefore, how do you therefore really challenge when the mores itself are so much founded on, you have to make children who, we were when we were in school, we were like, oh, you act like a lady, you act like a gentleman, right? And when you don't do that, there's going to be a really big cost for that. So Well, and having said that, I do think that the younger generation, they are much more aware of the LGBTQ rights. They are more aware of these, that there are gender non-performing people, and yet I would say that within these institutions where I've been trying to study, I think there's still a lot of reform needs to be done, and I mean, land in trouble for saying that, but it's true. Like, there is a lot of work. We need to not just think of sex and gender as discrete identities, but also to give space for the gender non-conforming individuals to flourish, to be their unhindered selves that I talk about in my book. Because when I was interviewing a lot of these younger children, some of them said that they had attempted suicide, right? And to that extent you're bullied, to that extent you're harassed, to that extent you are marginalized and othered, right? So I think it's high time that we need to talk about these, and not just here, but also in those institutional spaces as well.
The fact that these women labor are working and they're cheap, it's also because of consumers, right? Because people want cheap services, the way we like our Uber and, I don't know, I don't know what's here, like Ziggy or whatever. So the point I'm trying to make is, where do we stand, right? Because you spend a lot of time there with them, but where do we stand? What is our role and responsibility as a consumer? Because your paper talks of the way they're doubly marginalized. One, what is our responsibility then as a consumer? Because if we continue to take the services, then they keep getting exploited. And also then what is our responsibility also as citizens, because they're exploited on both levels, right? As labor and as non-citizens, right? So where do you think we stand? Like, what is our responsibility? Do we just not engage with them, or how can we make it better for them?
I mean, it's more than the responsibility of us individuals. I think it's the structures of patriarchal capitalism that kind of reproduces this kind of vulnerabilities. So it should be then engagement of the state, right, rather than us, because individuals we have limitations, and I mean we can, we kind of contribute or be polite to them or something, but that won't, kind of address the issue. So the issue needs to be addressed politically. And this is the limitation of the modern state itself, where the modern state kind of marks its members as citizens, and citizens are given the rights. But one who crosses the political boundaries from one nation state to other, they themselves become vulnerable when it is from a class position, that they being a labor. So more than the responsibility lying on us, the responsibility lies on the state, I guess. And also the limitation of the modern nation state. So I don't know how to see this, but one more thing is because we live in this era of modern nation state, even kind of forms of justice is even kind of territorialized. So when injustices does not have boundaries, then why do justices have boundaries within the territorial state? So those are the questions that needs to be raised, and that's a kind of far-fetched solution. But but I don't think we have that kind of capabilities. It's the state. We are very limited.
Alright, thank you very much for your responses. And I just wanted to get a sense of, because a lot of us here are not researchers, and the idea of this book is also to be a cross between academic and non-academic work. But I just wanted to get a quick take from both of you about the state of research in the region, because both of you work in the region, and if you could just tell our audience about what is it being what is it being a researcher in the region? What's the great stuff? What's the bad stuff? What are the challenges? And where do we need to do more? What do we need to focus more on? So what is it like being young research scholars from the region, in the region?
Being a researcher is kind of being unemployed. And it's like, if we don't have a topic that goes with the kind of the faculty members, it's very difficult to get in. So I've been trying to get into research, but like I've not gotten into an institution now. But still, I think like Nirvan said earlier, like we need people also in these faculties where they would kind of are willing to engage with us and also willing to engage with matters relating to the region. But I think because like there are few people who have made it to the faculty, it becomes very difficult to get in.
I think like, and someone who's inside a PhD program, the difficulties don't end with getting inside a PhD program. I think first of all, it's a lot of I think like Indian academia in general is very toxic. It is. I'm sorry, it is, right. It's toxic, right. You don't know who's your friend. You don't know who's happy for you. So first thing is like be very careful when you make friends in Indian academia. The second thing I think is like also like we need. I think we also need a lot of like there is lack of scholarships as well, right? I think for younger scholars, like to be an academician, you need backing, right? And like come on, like it's obvious that to even enter into a PhD program, you need to be a little bit of a middle class or an upper middle class family. Like for a lower middle class or for a poor person to even aspire to even enter a PhD program, it's like, let's be honest, it's next to impossible, right? Without a scholarship, which is again very difficult. Now it's getting even more competitive. So are there any philanthropy in our own societies, like in the Eastern Himalayas? Is there even one? And I know, okay, like there is a lot of rich people in this region. Like people have made money. But would even a family, let's say, say, oh, I want to give 10 scholarships. Will anybody say that? Right, but and our region everyone is like, maza garnu parcha. Like maza garnuko like people will line up and you'll spend lots of money, right? Like for beer party, like literally I know, right? But would anybody even want to, let's say, sponsor 10 children for a PhD program? That's like a big no-no. The idea itself is very ridiculous. So we need scholarships, we need publishers, right? Would I or anybody else? We have to think twice to even if I had written a decent piece or somebody else has, would they even have the capacity or the support to publish in OUP or a press, right? So I think these are so many factors that I think we need support on. So especially I would say like we would also need maybe workshops even on writing workshops and even on methodologies workshop, because in Indian universities we aren't taught methodology. We're just like given this sort of 10 hardcore papers on Foucault and Butler and read it, and you're supposed to like understand it and then supposed to reproduce it, like which is virtually next to impossible unless we're taught methodologies. So teach us methodologies, teachers give us how to act in the active voice, no? So I think those are things that we could be taught at a much younger age, and I think the next generation would be even much better than the work that we've been producing.
And I think the problem is also like of ingrained inferiority complex. Right? We somehow think that we're not good enough. But anyway.
So something that fascinated me through the chapters, the kind of themes that came up. We had decided on 3 themes: expression, experiences and performance of gender and other identities. But then the kind of themes, sub-themes that came up within these, right, where those were very fascinating. And for me, I think one of the most fascinating ones was how within these themes people also looked at going beyond binaries in terms of liminalities, liminal spaces, liminal identities. So I want to ask you, what was the most fascinating kind of theme for you?
I think you just hit, I think the challenge, not the challenge, but the exciting thing about this was that we wanted to go beyond just doing the generic stuff. We didn't want to just do patriarchy, gender, just in silos, We wanted to talk about the way different, the intersectionality of identities. So, the stuff that you just said about liminal identities, that was the most fascinating thing for me, because I suppose as a researcher, I'm jack of all trades, master of none, right? I do whatever pleases me. So it was really fascinating to see how these young scholars had thought of different sort of intersectionalities, right? And a paper that really comes to mind is Janisha's paper about disabled bodies, and then the supernatural, and gender, and patriarchy, and cinema. So it was really fascinating. So so for me, it was a liminality. What you just said, that was really interesting for me. And of course, I shouldn't have a pet theme, but yeah, that was one of it. But I have a question for you. You joined us as a co-editor. Did you enjoy the process, or what was your experience like?
Very much. I also learned a lot, and again, for me, when I read something, it's also about how are these people thinking. That is something I am really fascinated about every single time I read anything. And so yes, the range of things people talked about, brought out, and the ways in which they tried to address those things, that was fascinating for me. It taught me a lot of new things.
Well, the chapters, I'm always gushing and excited, because it is a really exciting product, for us. And the contributors have done, it's amazing. It really does, and I mean it when I say it gives me hope, that there is incredible work that's happening in our region, and we are so proud to be able to give a platform and to be involved with this. But with that, I just want to open up to the audience. I'm sure they have anyone would have any questions for our panel here, anything.
I'm Abhi, and I work at Chettri. So my question is to all of you, in fact. So when Nirvan was talking about carving a space in central universities, or in mainstream Indian spaces in academia, of course there is a need for that. But when I was in Delhi, I sort of experienced that exposure, and it sort of pushed me to aim bigger and higher. But when I came back here and I've started working here, it's been around 3-4 years that I've been here. So these days I'm dwelling with those thoughts about being here, working in the region, when you are in Delhi, when you are in that university setup, communicating with people, you don't have that environment here, right? So sometimes I feel lost, to be honest. And last time when I was talking with Monadi, these were the things we were discussing on. So how do we maintain that balance, or
So you will get exposure, but you will never be an insider. Does that make sense? They will give you enough to train you, but if there's a special issue that they're publishing on, they would never consider you, right? You getting it? How those spaces remain open to a certain you can open certain doors, but after that those doors don't open for us. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, that we need to create our own spaces. We need to create those own doors, because those doors are not going to open for us whether you go to any central university. It won't open for us. Am I wrong? What would you add to that?
Just very quickly, Abriti, I know what you're saying, and I understand this being in this flux, right? But at some point, I think we also need to stop seeking validation, right, from people. But yeah, what I would say is it's important to do research in the region, but also be connected with the wider issues, and you have to build and maintain your networks, right? So it's really about trying to find that balance and looking at things that work for you. You want to work in the region, but you want to get better training, whatever, you've got to seek opportunities where you can do that. So you've got to try and seek that balance, right? And that's how I approach it. So I don't know, but we can obviously have a very long chat about it, as we did the last time. But yeah.
Yes,
First of all, I'm very, very encouraged that this kind of thing is happening finally, because I have this experience of about 40 years here in Gangtok and in Sikkim, and there was no researchers, there was no interest in research, and parents like my generation would not encourage their children to go in for research, because the main, so this is so encouraging. I am a researcher, I feel, still, because I work on wildlife, and throughout my career, even before coming to Sikkim, I was working in that field, and that took me to places beyond Gangtok. and beyond a city. So I can understand a young man sitting next to Mona, talking about migrant workers. My experience was that most of the road construction that was happening during my time was by women laborers. The gref laborers were always women with a little baby in the basket on the roadside, and then they would take time off to go and feed their babies and come back again and sit and break stones. And it was such a thing for parents to say, if you don't study properly, you become a coolie like that. And we passed through that kind of situation. And then obviously, the work doesn't get done at the speed that was expected. And then you have finally, if it was in the Border Roads Organization or the GREF, then you have the military coming in and engineers making the same thing what the women were doing in maybe 10 days, they would do it in an hour or so, So that kind of situation I have seen physically myself happening. Nowadays it's not there so much because I think the government took a stand about sending the laborers back to Nepal, because most of them were, like you said, they're migrant laborers from Nepal. And now we have a lot of people from Bihar and West Bengal occupying that space. So you no longer see babies by the roadside, whether it is a Changu or whether it's a Zuluk in the snow, with the exposed conditions, they're working with Sherpas and all, wearing really ragged clothes, and they're supposed to be getting kerosene, and then they have to still buy their rations from what is still called a Baidar, the supervisor. It's very, very difficult lives. So I'm grateful to all of you that you actually given the voice to this voiceless community, which we are like exploiting, I feel, because we use them, but we don't acknowledge them, as you very rightly pointed out. So kudos to you all, and may your tribe increase.
Yeah, I've got one question, please. My name is Dinkar Guru. I'm an architect, town planner. So I could, whatever you said, I went to a boarding school in Kalimpong, so I know how non-conforming, what issues you have to face. Then I went to college in Calcutta, so it's not only about non-conformity of gender or something like that. When I went to Calcutta, I think one professor just walked in, started his lecture in Bengali. Full architecture lecture. It made me stronger now I know Bengali. I know what they're talking about. So it spans through everything, even in my office. If I'm not conforming to a certain type of practices, I'll be sidelined. So it's not only the gender or the sexual orientation. So with your type of effort, your researchers, where does it lead? Does it help, or it just becomes a book in the shelf? Because for me, in my practice, sometimes what happens is we are on ground with my just postgraduate degree in town planning. Then I have to deal with people who are making a lot of standards, who are all PhDs, but they are not really in sync with what's happening in the ground. So there are a lot of conflicts. Their narrative is not understood by everyone. So my question, I'm not trying to discourage or something. Where does it lead? Does it lead somewhere, or it's just like?
That's a dilemma that I, as a budding scholar, would have. But the thing is, while we do our research, we go and we engage in the field. I mean, that not only kind of transforms us, but it also does transform the person or the people that we are talking about, we're talking to. So when you ask them about what is the scene or how do you feel, so they do answer that. But if it's in a group, they also sometimes become conscious about the social reality that surrounds them. And in the process, it also transforms an individual. So it does transform me. So in one way, I being a member of a society, if I am transforming in one manner, it is transforming the society itself, right? So yeah, that's there, the books that lie on the bookshelves, that's there. But like kind of we are getting together and talking about these things. Like so many of us are aware of some things, but it took like the stories, not just stories, but the lived experience that we bring from the field itself is like kind of gradually changing the society. But it's a process. But Whereas if it's kind of an administrative kind of an work, so then we can, yeah, obviously go and change the policies and kind of implement it. But research is kind of a process that kind of transforms an individual in a kind of a gradual process. And that's where we change as an individual and as a group or collectively. And that's why we see difference from one culture to another and from one place to another.
Okay, I'll just chip in my 20 cents. I think I'm just like slightly more jaded than Yojak. Having been in this business for a while. So yeah, what does it all lead to? Yeah, it does lead to books that also lie in shelves, right? But I think, as Yojak said, it can be transforming. Research can be transforming in different ways. Just the very fact that we are sitting here and talking about these things, the fact that we're creating space for conversations that have not happened before, I think these are still things that we should value. You know, yes, of course, what you do as an architect on a day-to-day basis is also very important, but I think what we are doing here is also very important. It's very important to have these discussions and conversations. And of course, yes, I could say like, yeah, my paper is going to change the world, but I know that it's not, So yeah, I think our ambitions are quite muted in terms of what we can actually achieve, but we still strive on. I don't know. I think we can't like back out also, right? Like too invested in this process.
No, that's valid enough. Because I also have to do some research which gets in the shelves. They don't get implemented as a planner. So that's quite frustrating for us.
Yeah, Shraddha.
I just have a question per se, like just a reflection. Like when you search for research on Northeast India, generally books that say it's an anthropology or history of Northeast India, you don't find chapters on Sikkim. You might find chapters on Sikkim, but they are not political histories. They are, very non-political in nature. So I feel like a work like this, even in terms of gender, like gender in Northeast India, you find a lot of research that's confined to militarization, and because Sikkim does not fall within that category, so we didn't have research like this before. So I feel like there was a gap before, and research like this tends to fill up that gap that exists in Northeast Indian studies. In a way, like Sikkim and Darjeeling are not just in borders, they are even in the borders of borders. So yeah.
And we just don't I think that's the whole point of the Eastern Himalayan series, is we don't want to be clubbed with the Northeast, because this is a very unique and a special place with its own history, its own culture, and our own politics, So we have all the right to also be our own selves, right? And we don't want to be clubbed with, well, although Sikkim is technically part of the Northeast, but yeah, what you're saying is right. And also, like, I think with this book, we are trying to also go beyond these very generic ways of looking at gender and identities, right? It's quite frustrating when you have to encounter literature on gender. It's very formulaic, it's very statistics, and not much analysis, critical analysis, forget about it. There's not much analysis, there's just statement of facts. So I think, in a sense, we're trying to push that sort of, way of writing, but also making it approachable to a wider audience, which is not just academic, but it's still academic, in a sense. Any...
Yes.
All day. So my first question is, do you delve into this problem per se as in a more generic fashion, or you are trying to highlight certain aspects of this bullying and non-conforming to the gender is particular to that locality, geographically or class or in any other manner? This is my first question. So my second question is, obviously it is too late to do. Are you all not thought about packaging it for a general audience about the subject, because the subject is common for everybody and it is universal, it's not unique to any particular location or this. So obviously they've done a wonderful job. Why not extend that kind of research to include, or perhaps interconnect with all that happens in other places, and also this. Probably this could be an anecdotal thing, but you can do.
Yeah, so I think like a good ethnographer or a good academician will always tell you that we are always taught, don't make general claims, don't make general claims, stick to a certain topic. But there is a one section in my chapter where I talk about how these gender non-conforming students, they said they don't want to play, and since the schools are very much like you have to push guys to pick up a sport and play, and they said, and the teachers used to say some things like, hey, don't run like a Loreto girl, right? Don't run like a Loreto girl. And that's something that I think everybody in the Eastern Himalayas will get it, right? So there are these idiosyncrasies of the chapter that I think it brings out, and you won't see this in in other parts of the country. There's something like that, or there's something like all about theater, right? Where the whole school year they'll be bullied, but when there's a school major production, they will say, hey, please perform the role of Juliet, because you can you can play Juliet with ultra realness, right? So that's something that's unique about our region, right? So I think my chapter does bring out that idiosyncrasy, and like I said, we want to tell our stories, and it's unique. It's not something that you'll find in South India, or not something that you'll find in Dehradun. And of course, there are so many schools in Doon, and there's Woodstock. But yeah, I think we do try and bring out that uniqueness of our region in our book.
Yeah, just like a quick response to the second part of your question about why is it not general enough, right? Because these are issues that are happening everywhere. Yes, these are issues that are happening everywhere. But I think the fact that this is an academic practice means that these are issues that are happening everywhere, but it's also very localized, right? So these are local stories, but they resonate with everyone. So there's a different approach to looking at this, right? So it's not like saying, oh, this is only stories, we are just specific to this. No, if you look at the chapters, we engage with literature from across the region, right? But the case studies are still from the space, right? Because as we've talked about all evening, we need to create space for our stories, and we need to be able to tell it ourselves, but not in a way that is only interesting for this audience. Anyone should be able to pick up this book and go like, oh yeah, these are really interesting things. I can understand why this is happening, right? But it's also very interesting to know that these are like very, these are specific to the location also. So it's a combination, that you have to have with any good academic writing, is that you have to have very specific cases, but that are also very linked to general and broad discourse, if that makes any sense. And I'm sure if you read it, you'll see it. We're trying to fill up a space for literature from the region, because that is required, right? But it's also accessible to everyone, and it's out there now, in the sense that we've published it. It's published now, everybody. It's open for sale, right? As you like to say. So everyone can get it, and the whole point is that it's not just specific. The issues are global even, but the context is local, right? And that's what we're trying to do. So everyone can read it and enjoy it and engage with it. Yeah.
I want to add to that a little bit that issues are universal in a big sense, but there are flavors, regional flavors to it. So, for instance, we tend to concentrate on, this is patriarchy. But the way patriarchy works in Sikkim versus the way patriarchy works in Nagaland versus the way patriarchy works in Kerala, in Delhi, it's all different. I think that kind of resonance that you just mentioned about, that is important, but also highlighting this kind of different flavors is also important. I think that's what we are aiming at. Yeah.
My name is Sonu. I'm a PG, Sikkim University, Ganta. And as a researcher, I have a question. So, as a researcher, when you use ethnography, when you use qualitative research, and when we talk to people, so they must have opened to you, especially younger children, with such a vulnerable issues. They must have really opened. As a researcher, where did you lead them? How? Because talking about things which is not even spoken about, it is a big task for them, and they being children. So now they've opened up, and as a researcher, how did you close the conversation, or how, in what end, or where did you lead them?
It's an interesting question. In the field, it's like, I think as a researcher, you must clarify it to them about the limitations of research, because they come up with kind of an expectations. Now when you ask them about their problems, because we need it to write it down, their lived experiences, I think we must be honest enough to tell them that it is for research purpose, and this is my limitations, and beyond it, like, I mean, that's just there. I mean, that's the limitation. Even I can't help it, being a researcher. So, I mean, that's the kind of moral thing that we go through. So, what I do is, like, I inform them earlier only. This is for research purpose, and this is my limitations, and beyond that, I mean, even I can't help it, because that's the limitation.
Me, I think, of course, like, to inform them that you have to get consent from them, right? So that was obviously done. But also, I think, like, isn't our research or the chapters that we've done itself a fulfillment or rather a completion of our ethnographic work that we've started with them, right? Like I said earlier, that our research is our responsibility to tell their stories, but to tell them stories responsibly, right? So I would say that the chapter that I've written is itself my, of course, like, yes, I would get, like, a published, but also, like, it's to tell their stories, and I think somehow, like, it's a form of representation, right? And representation matters, right? Whose stories are told, why are certain stories not told, right? So I think that itself is our responsibility as writers, is to tell their stories.
For me, I mean, generally in terms of research, and not just about any particular community that you work with, whether it is children or women or whoever, whatever, but generally with research, this is also something very much debated in my area of research, as in linguistics. We always go to communities to learn their languages and speak about the languages, and then we get the credit. This is about the ethics of research. What do you mean by giving back to the community? What do you give? You are getting something out of it. But then, so a lot of people have, and we still talk about what can we do actually. Then, in the sense of where do we leave them? There are a lot of people who say that you still keep in touch with them, try to help them. Linguists, for example, like Gerald Roche, they have tried to help in policy making, where the linguistic rights of the communities are taken into account by the state and stuff like that. Also, there are a lot of researchers who keep in touch with the community even after the research is over and try to help them in ways that they want to be helped. So I guess there are ways, but there is no definite answer to this. Where does our responsibility end? No idea.
Research is extractive, as we all know, right? I mean, there's no going around it. It is extractive. But I think before, like, getting to the point of where do you leave them, I think it's also about, like, how do you build that relationship before people open up to you, especially with their life stories, right? So that's the thing about ethnography, is that you have to invest yourself and your time. So how do you leave that then becomes a very personal thing, right? Because you have to build a relationship, a connection, right? And then how do you leave that? Then it's something that you negotiate with that person or with that community on a personal basis, right? Because sometimes people can be very demanding, or they can feel that you've abandoned them and things like that, right? So, but then of course you do also find ways to stay in touch. But I think before we get to how do we leave them, it's also about the relationship that you build in the process.
To the whole, how do the research ends up with a kind of bringing back to the society? Well, I'm from anthropology department at Sikkim University. So when we do an ethnograph, there are many instances where too much of indulgence with the community that you're working, the ethnographers end up as a kings in their own community. Many anthropologists around the world, be it in Africa, be it in Oceania, Melanesia, or in Americas, I know many ethnographers, they left their jobs and they become a part of the community, and eventually they are the chiefs of the community. So there is the researcher needs to know where the balance is to be. Whether you end up in the community or you bring back, you liaise with this community to the to the welfare organizations and all these things. So it is not that just one part of it that the ethnographer, as Mona is saying, definitely it is an exploitative thing, but the researcher knows where these things should build up. Either you are this side or you are that side, or that kind of an ethical background. One should keep it up, and obviously one has to do good things for the community which you have been studying and getting benefit out of it. I know many ethnographers in the world who has produced excellent textbooks. They always bring back money to the society. I work with many American researchers. They do bring a lot of research, benefits to the society, right to the concerned authorities. I mean, there is always the other side of also. I just want to add what Mona is saying.
Generally, researchers from this region need. I always felt like that lack of peer support. Like even when I was in Delhi, because I studied in Delhi too, like you go through instances, be it in interviews or in conferences, and then you come out of it like not knowing that what you faced is racism, or like generally also how the entire system or institution of academia works. So like how do you think we can create more supportive peer support systems where you don't have to constantly explain yourself that what happened today was wrong?
But I just quickly respond to Shraddha, and I think we just, as academics and researchers, we just need to be nicer to one another. That's all I'll say, because it doesn't end with just like PhDs, it's an ongoing thing. We need to be nicer, kinder to one another, because I think we're just trained to be so critical all the time of each other and our own selves that for a long time we just walk around with this imposter syndrome where we feel we're never good enough, right? So I think we should learn to be kind to ourselves and to each other. Yeah. Final words, you guys. What is it? What is the next thing for you guys?
Next thing is like, it's research. And maybe get a job.
Finishing my PhD soon, so I guess unemployment.
I've passed that unemployment wala phase. Just got a job. but more research, more connection to the communities, more connection to human beings, yes. And like you said earlier, academia in India is very toxic. If I can make any small change in that, I would be really happy. I try in my own environment where I am, I try to be helpful to people who are trying, and I try to be, I don't know, there is limitations to what we can do, but keep trying.
But I'd like to close this with my thanks to all the panel members here. Thank you very much to the audience for being here, being supportive. It's really amazing to be back home and to reconnect on so many different levels. And thanks also to Sauji here, who's been very kind and patient, and also to Yohan for recording